Hi, I'm Madison. I'm a college dropout. But that Thanksgiving night, when my dad screamed, "Get out, you lowlife," they had no idea I'd just checked my crypto wallet. $45.2 million. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family for not following the traditional path? Because what happened next changed everything. It was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving dinner. I was sitting at our old oak dining table, the same one where I'd done homework as a kid, wearing my usual outfit, a faded gray hoodie and jeans with holes in the knees. My mom had set out her best china, the kind she only used for holidays, and the smell of turkey and stuffing filled our modest suburban home in Ohio. My sister Pearl was glowing. She'd just graduated with her MBA from Northwestern and couldn't stop talking about her new consulting job at McKinsey. She was wearing this perfectly tailored blazer, her hair done in that sleek professional style, and every few minutes she'd check her Apple Watch like she was expecting some important business call. "So, Madison," my dad said, carving the turkey with more force than necessary, "what exactly are you doing with your life these days?" His tone had that edge it always got when he talked to me, like disappointment mixed with barely contained frustration. I looked up from my plate. "I'm working on some projects. Tech stuff, mostly." Pearl laughed, not the kind laugh of a sister, but that condescending chuckle she'd perfected since business school. "Tech stuff? Madison, you dropped out of community college. You don't even have an associate's degree." My mom nodded along. "Pearl's right, honey. Maybe it's time to think about going back to school. Look at your sister. She has a real career now, benefits, a 401k. I stayed quiet. This was nothing new. For the past 5 years since I'd dropped out at 19, every family gathering turned into an intervention about my wasted potential. They saw me as the family failure, the daughter who couldn't even finish community college, who lived in a tiny studio apartment across town, who showed up to family dinners looking like I'd rolled out of bed. What they didn't know was that 3 hours before dinner, I'd been on a video call with my business partner, Jake, watching our latest cryptocurrency algorithm execute a trade that netted us $2.3 million. What they didn't see was the portfolio on my phone showing assets worth more than most people make in 10 lifetimes. "I actually wanted to talk to you about Pearl's investment plan," I said quietly, trying to change the subject to something I could actually contribute to. Pearl perked up. "Oh, right. I showed you guys my 5-year financial plan, remember? I'm putting 15% into my 401k, and I found this great financial advisor who's getting me into some mutual funds." I nodded. "That's smart for stability, but have you thought about diversifying into some alternative investments? Maybe some tech stocks or even looking into cryptocurrency? The market's been—" My dad slammed his fork down so hard the china rattled. "Are you serious right now?" The whole table went silent. Even my mom stopped mid-chew. "You're going to sit there and give investment advice? You who can't even hold down a minimum wage job? You who dropped out of school because it was too hard?" His voice was getting louder with each word. "Dad, I just thought—" "No, Madison. You don't get to think. You don't get to have opinions about money when you've never earned a real dollar in your life. Look at yourself." He gestured at my hoodie with disgust. 29 years old and you dress like you're homeless. You live in that rat hole apartment? You don't have a car that runs half the time and you want to give financial advice to someone with a master's degree? Pearl was staring at her plate, but I could see she was enjoying this. She'd always been the golden child. Straight A's, college scholarship, perfect internships. I was the screw-up who disappointed everyone by walking away from school to pursue what they called my computer games. I'm just saying there are opportunities. Opportunities? My dad stood up now, his face red. "The only opportunity you need is to get your life together. Get a real job, go back to school, stop living in your fantasy world where you think you're some kind of entrepreneur." My mom reached over and touched his arm. "Honey, maybe we should—" "No, Linda, she needs to hear this. Madison, you are 29 years old. Most people your age are buying houses, getting married, building careers. And what do you have to show for your life? Nothing. Absolutely nothing." The words hit like physical blows. I'd heard variations of this speech before, but never with this much venom. "You walk around here like you're better than us, like you know something we don't. But you know what you are? His voice dropped to a cold whisper. You're trash. You're a disappointment. You're a college dropout with no skills, no prospects, and no future. I felt something break inside me. Not because he was wrong, I knew exactly what I'd accomplished, but because these were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and they couldn't see past their own narrow definition of success. Get out! He screamed suddenly, making my mom jump. Get out of my house. I'm done pretending to be proud of you. I'm done making excuses for you at work when people ask about my daughters. Get out, you lowlife, and don't come back. The silence that followed was deafening. Pearl was staring at her hands. My mom had tears in her eyes but didn't say a word to defend me. They were choosing their side, and it wasn't mine. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling shaky. Fine. That was all I said. Just fine. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair and walked toward the door. Madison, my mom called softly, but when I turned back, she looked away. I left through the front door, the same door I'd run through as a kid coming home from school, excited to tell my parents about my day. The November air was cold against my face, and I could hear my dad's voice still yelling inside about how I'd brought this on myself, and how maybe this would teach me some responsibility. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic for a few minutes, just breathing. My phone buzzed with a notification from my crypto trading app. Another successful transaction. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my dad was screaming about my lack of success, my algorithms were making more money in 10 minutes than he made in a month. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to think. This wasn't just about tonight. This was years of accumulated disappointment, of being the family member everyone whispered about, the cautionary tale they told about what happens when you don't follow the rules. What hurt the most wasn't even the words. It was that they had no curiosity about my life. They'd never asked what I actually did all day, never wondered how I paid my rent, never questioned why I seemed so calm about money when they were always stressed about bills. Back at my studio apartment, which by the way, I owned outright, I sat on my couch and opened my laptop. The same laptop my dad had thrown across the room 5 years ago when I'd told him I was dropping out. I'd had it repaired, upgraded the hard drive, and this useless machine had generated more wealth than my entire extended family combined. My phone started buzzing. Text messages from my family group chat, which was really just Pearl and my parents, coordinating their narrative about what had happened. Pearl. She brought this on herself. Mom. Maybe this will teach her responsibility. Dad. Should have done this years ago. Then I watched in real time as they removed me from the group chat. Just like that, I was erased from the family communication network. 29 years of shared history reduced to blocked contact. More messages came in from extended family. Apparently, word had spread quickly through the family network. Cousin Sarah. Heard what happened. Maybe it's time to grow up. Uncle Mike. Your dad's just trying to help you see reality. One by one, they were choosing sides. And it wasn't mine. I wanted to feel angry, but mostly I felt tired. Tired of hiding who I really was. Tired of playing the role of the family disappointment to protect them from their own small-mindedness. Because here's what they didn't know. I'd been financially supporting some of their emergencies for years. That time Uncle Mike needed help with his mortgage. That came from one of my accounts. When Pearl's car broke down during her first year of grad school, I'd sent the money through my mom, letting her take credit for helping. I'd been the family's secret safety net while letting them believe I was the burden. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and started making arrangements. If they wanted me out of their lives, then they were about to find out what out really looked like. I booked a flight to Miami for the next morning. See, what my family didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask about, was that I owned a $4.2 million beachfront villa in Key Biscayne, 4,500 square feet, infinity pool, private beach access, and a dock for the yacht I was thinking about buying. I'd purchased it 8 months ago under an LLC, just like most of my real estate investments. The plan had been to surprise them eventually, maybe invite them down for Christmas, show them that their failure daughter had built something extraordinary. But as I packed my single suitcase, most of my real clothes were already in Florida, I realized I was done trying to earn their approval. I was done shrinking myself to fit their limited vision of success. The next morning, I took an Uber to the airport. Not because I couldn't afford a car service, but because I'd gotten used to hiding my wealth. As we drove past my parents' neighborhood, I wondered if they'd even noticed I was gone. The flight to Miami was surreal. I sat in first class. I always flew first class, another secret I'd kept, and thought about the conversation I'd had with Jake the week before. "Why don't you just tell them?" he'd asked during one of our business meetings. Jake Morrison was my crypto mentor and business partner, the only person who knew the full extent of my success. "Madison, you've built a $45 million portfolio from nothing. You're funding 3 tech startups, you own property in 4 states, and you're one of the most successful traders I know. Why are you still pretending to be broke?" I'd given him some excuse about not wanting to change family dynamics, about wanting to be loved for who I was, not what I had. But sitting on that plane, I realized the truth was more complicated. I'd been afraid that if they knew about my success, they'd want to take credit for it or worse, try to control it. Afraid that their love, conditional as it was, might become even more transactional. But after last night, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was free. The key to my Florida villa was in a lockbox I'd never used. I usually had my property manager handle everything. But as I stood in front of the glass doors, looking out at the turquoise water of Biscayne Bay, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt proud of myself. This house represented 5 years of 18-hour days, learning everything I could about cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and algorithmic trading. It represented the nights I'd gone to sleep hungry because I'd invested my last $100 instead of buying groceries, betting on my own ability to see patterns others missed. It represented every family gathering where I'd smiled and nodded while they talked about my wasted potential, knowing I was building something they couldn't even imagine. The villa was exactly as I'd left it, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture in whites and grays, and that incredible view that had convinced me to buy the place sight unseen. My property manager, Roberto, had left fresh flowers on the kitchen island and stocked the refrigerator with my favorite foods. I walked out onto the terrace, past the infinity pool that seemed to blend into the ocean beyond, and called Jake. "How's the exile going?" he asked, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'm standing on my terrace in Key Biscayne, watching the sunset over water that's bluer than my family's small-town minds can imagine," I said. "And how does that feel?" Like I should have done this years ago. We talked for an hour about everything. The new DeFi project we were considering, the tech startup that wanted to hire me as a consultant, the speaking engagement I'd been invited to at a blockchain conference in Singapore. All the parts of my life that my family had no idea existed. "So what's the plan?" Jake asked eventually. I looked back at my house, at the life I'd built in secret, and made a decision. I think it's time they found out who Madison Crawford really is. And if they don't care? I thought about that for a moment. About the possibility that even knowing about my success wouldn't change how they saw me. About the chance that they'd find new ways to diminish or dismiss what I'd accomplished. "Then at least I'll know where I stand," I said finally. What I didn't tell Jake was that I was already planning something that would happen in exactly 3 weeks at Pearl's MBA graduation party. Something that would either bridge the gap between us forever or close it permanently. Because here's what they were about to learn. The daughter they'd thrown away had built an empire. And empires, once revealed, can't be ignored. But first I had some arrangements to make. Some calls to some very important people. Some plans to put in motion. 3 weeks wasn't much time to orchestrate the kind of revelation that changes everything. But then again, I'd built a $45 million fortune in 5 years. 3 weeks would be plenty. The first week in Florida felt like living someone else's life, which, in a way, I was. For 5 years, I'd compartmentalized my existence so thoroughly that Madison, the family disappointment, and Madison, the crypto millionaire, felt like 2 different people. Now, for the first time, I was just me. I woke up each morning to the sound of waves instead of traffic. My home office, a glass-walled room overlooking the bay, became my command center. 3 monitors displayed real-time market data, trading algorithms, and video calls with business partners across different time zones. This was where the real Madison lived, where that worthless dropout my father had screamed about actually thrived. Jake flew down from Chicago on day 3. We'd been business partners for 2 years, but he'd never seen my Florida setup. Walking through the villa, he stopped at every window, every piece of art, every detail that screamed success. "Jesus, Madison," he said, standing in my office watching the algorithms execute trades in real time. "You built all this while letting them think you were failing?" "I was protecting them," I said, though the words sounded hollow even to me. "And maybe protecting myself." "From what?" That was the question I'd been avoiding. From what exactly? From their judgment? Their attempts to control my money? Or from the possibility that even my success wouldn't be enough to earn their love? Jake pulled up a chair next to my desk. "Show me the numbers, all of it." For the next hour, I walked him through everything. The crypto portfolio that had grown from my initial $500 investment to $31.2 million, the real estate holdings, the Florida villa, a penthouse in Manhattan, rental properties in Austin and Denver, the equity stakes in 3 tech startups, including one that was preparing for an IPO that would likely triple my investment. "The total liquid assets are around $45 million, I said, watching his expression. "But if you include projected returns and the startup equity, we're looking at closer to $65 million within 2 years." Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing, not at me, but with a kind of amazed disbelief. "Madison, you realize you're one of the most successful people I know, and I know people who run Fortune 500 companies." "Yeah, well, try explaining that to my dad." "Why haven't you? I mean, really, what's the worst that could happen?" I pulled up the screenshots I'd taken of the family group chat before they'd removed me. The messages calling me irresponsible, saying I'd brought this on myself, agreeing that maybe being cut off would teach me a lesson. "They've already decided who I am," I said. "Even if I showed them the bank statements tomorrow, they'd find a way to diminish it. Lucky investments. Probably illegal. It won't last. I've heard every variation when I've tried to give them financial advice." But even as I said it, I knew I was making excuses. The truth was more complicated, and it had everything to do with that old Dell laptop sitting on my bookshelf. I got up and retrieved it, running my fingers over the crack in the screen that had never quite healed right. "You want to know the real story?" I asked Jake. "It started with this. 5 years ago, when I'd told my parents I was dropping out of community college, my dad had completely lost it. He'd grabbed my laptop, this laptop, and thrown it across the room, screaming about how I was wasting my life on useless computer games. "This machine won't feed you," he'd yelled. "This isn't real work. This isn't a real skill." I'd waited until they went to bed, then carefully collected all the pieces, spent my last $200 getting it repaired instead of paying that month's electric bill. Sat in the dark for 3 days, learning to code by the light of this cracked screen, because I was determined to prove him wrong. Those first months were brutal. I was living on ramen and determination, spending 18 hours a day studying blockchain technology, cryptocurrency markets, algorithmic trading. I built my first trading bot on this laptop, tested it with the $500 saved from my part-time job at a coffee shop. When that first bot made me $50 in a day, I thought I was rich. When it made $500 in a week, I knew I was onto something. But I kept it secret, partly because I was afraid of being wrong, but mostly because I couldn't handle another lecture about get-rich-quick schemes and fantasy money. Every trade, every investment, every breakthrough happened on this machine, I told Jake. The same machine my dad called useless. Jake examined the laptop, noting the careful repairs, the upgraded hardware I'd installed as my profits grew. "And they still don't know?" "They never asked. In 5 years, not once has anyone in my family asked me what I actually do all day, how I pay my bills, or why I seem so unconcerned about money. They assumed I was failing because I didn't fit their definition of success. What made it worse was that I'd been secretly helping them for years. When Uncle Mike was facing foreclosure, I'd anonymously paid 3 months of his mortgage through a law firm. When Pearl's car died during grad school, I'd sent money to my mom, letting her take credit for helping her daughter. When my parents' furnace broke 2 winters ago, I'd covered the repair costs through a fake utility assistance program I'd invented. I'd been their invisible safety net while they treated me like a burden. Madison, Jake said carefully, you realize this is emotional abuse, right? They've systematically undermined your confidence, dismissed your achievements, and isolated you from the family when you didn't conform to their expectations. I'd never heard it put so bluntly, but he was right. The pattern was clear when viewed from the outside. Minimize Madison's accomplishments, maximize her failures, maintain the family hierarchy with Pearl as the successful daughter, and me as the cautionary tale. So, what are you going to do about it? That's when I told him about Pearl's MBA graduation party, scheduled for exactly 2 weeks from today. The whole family would be there, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone who had participated in my exile, everyone who had chosen their side without hearing mine. I'm going to tell them the truth, I said. All of it. And then what? And then we'll see if they're capable of change, or if they're too invested in the story they've created about me. Jake was quiet for a moment, studying the market data on my screens. You know there's a chance this backfires completely. They might accuse you of hiding money, being deceptive, showing off. They might find new reasons to push you away. I know. But you're going to do it anyway. I spent 5 years hiding who I really am to protect their feelings. I'm done being small to make other people comfortable. Over the next week, I began documenting everything. Not just the financial records, though those were important, but the pattern of behavior, the systematic dismissal, the emotional manipulation that had kept me silent for so long. I compiled screenshots of every time I'd offered financial advice and been shut down. Email records showing the anonymous payments I'd made to help family members. Text messages where they'd asked for money loans that were never repaid, usually through my mom as an intermediary, while continuing to call me irresponsible. The most damaging evidence was a recorded phone conversation from 6 months ago, where my mom had called asking if I could help Pearl with her student loan payment because she was struggling after graduation. I know you don't have much, honey, but even $50 would help, my mom had said. I'd sent $2,000 that same day. 3 days later, Pearl had posted Instagram photos from a weekend in Napa Valley with her new McKinsey colleagues. The trip cost more than I'd sent to help with her struggling finances. But the documentation wasn't for revenge. It was for clarity. I needed them to understand the full scope of their hypocrisy before I could decide whether reconciliation was even possible. Jake helped me prepare for every possible reaction. We role-played scenarios where they accused me of illegal activity, where they demanded access to my money, where they tried to take credit for my success. We practiced responses to gaslighting attempts, to efforts to minimize my achievements, to the inevitable, why didn't you tell us sooner? The key, Jake reminded me, is to stay calm and factual. Let the evidence speak for itself. Don't get defensive. Don't justify your choices. Just present the truth and let them decide how to respond. 3 days before Pearl's party, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called my property manager and arranged for my parents and Pearl to receive anonymous invitations to a private tour of exclusive Key Biscayne properties. The invitation would come through a high-end real estate agency, presented as a market research opportunity with a small compensation for their time. They wouldn't know they were being brought to my house until they arrived. I wanted them to see my life before I told them it was mine. I wanted them to experience the cognitive dissonance of standing in a multi-million-dollar villa while still thinking of me as a failure. It would make the revelation more impactful, and it would prevent them from immediately minimizing or dismissing what I'd achieved. The night before the party, I sat on my terrace with a glass of wine, watching the lights of Miami twinkle across the water. My phone had been silent for 3 weeks. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement of my existence from the people who had raised me. Tomorrow, that would change forever. I thought about the scared 19-year-old who had picked up the pieces of her broken laptop and refused to give up. About the nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk, coding until my eyes burned. About every small victory that I'd celebrated alone because I couldn't share it with the people who mattered most. That girl had built this life, this success, this empire. Not for money, though the money was nice. Not for status, though the independence was intoxicating. She'd built it to prove a point that no one was listening to hear. Tomorrow, they would finally listen. The morning of Pearl's graduation party dawned clear and bright. I dressed carefully, not the designer clothes hanging in my Florida closet, but something my family would recognize. Dark jeans, a nice blouse, minimal makeup. I wanted to look successful without looking like I was trying too hard. The revelation would be shocking enough without adding costume changes to the drama. I drove my Tesla Model S Plaid to Ohio, another secret I'd kept. My family thought I was taking buses everywhere, never questioning how I could afford to travel at all. The 4-hour drive gave me time to think, to prepare, to steel myself for every possible outcome. Pearl's party was being held at a country club my parents couldn't afford, but Pearl's new McKinsey salary apparently could. I arrived exactly when the invitation specified, fashionably late, but not rudely so. The parking lot was full of cars I recognized. My parents' aging sedan, my uncle's pickup trucks, my cousin's practical family vehicles. My Tesla looked absurdly out of place among them, which was exactly the statement I was going for. I sat in the car for a moment, engine running, watching through the windows as my family celebrated Pearl's achievement. They looked happy, relaxed, complete, like they hadn't spent 3 weeks systematically erasing me from their lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Remember, facts not feelings. You've got this." I turned off the engine and walked toward the door. The country club's main dining room was decorated in Northwestern's purple and white, with blown-up photos of Pearl in her graduation cap and gown. She looked radiant, surrounded by family members who were genuinely proud of her achievement. I felt a pang of sadness. Not jealousy, but grief for the relationship we might have had if she hadn't needed me to fail for her to succeed. My entrance caused a ripple of surprised whispers. Conversations paused, heads turned, someone dropped a fork. I hadn't been invited, obviously, but I also hadn't been explicitly uninvited. Family parties had always been open-door affairs, at least until 3 weeks ago. My mother saw me first. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been relief, then a hardening back into the disappointed resignation she wore whenever she looked at me. "Madison," she said, approaching carefully like I might be dangerous. "What are you doing here?" "Congratulating Pearl," I said simply. "Is that allowed?" Before she could answer, Pearl appeared at her shoulder. My sister looked exactly like she had 3 weeks ago. Perfectly put together, professionally styled, radiating that confidence that comes from never having been truly challenged. "Madison," she said, and her voice carried that familiar tone of long-suffering patience. "I thought, after what happened, I realized some things needed to change," I said. "We need to talk. All of us." My father had noticed me now. I watched him excuse himself from a conversation with my grandfather and begin walking over, his expression darkening with each step. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, the confrontation that would determine whether my family was capable of growth or permanently stuck in their narrow worldview. "What the hell are you doing here?" he said, his voice low, but carrying enough edge that nearby conversations stopped. "I'm here because it's time you knew the truth about who your daughter actually is," I said calmly. "We know exactly who you are," he replied. "You're the ungrateful dropout who thinks she's better than her family." "No, Dad. You know who you've decided I am. You've never bothered to learn who I actually am." I pulled out my phone and opened the cryptocurrency trading app, the one that showed my portfolio balance in real time. I held it up so they could all see the screen. This is who I actually am. The number on the screen, $45,247.32, seemed to glow in the country club's soft lighting. My father's expression shifted from anger to confusion to disbelief. "That's fake," he said automatically. "Anyone can edit numbers on a screen." I opened my banking app next, showing the balance in my primary checking account, $3.2 million. Then my real estate portfolio app, listing properties in 4 states with a combined value of $8.7 million. "Also fake?" I asked. Pearl was staring at the phone like it might bite her. Madison, what is this? What are you trying to prove? I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm showing you what I've accomplished while you've been calling me a failure. The family members who had gathered around us were silent now, studying the screens I kept showing them. Aunt Linda pulled out her reading glasses to get a better look at the numbers. Uncle Mike let out a low whistle. Even if those numbers are real, my father said, his voice shaking slightly. Which I doubt. Where did that money come from? What did you do? Rob a bank? Sell drugs? This was exactly the reaction Jake had predicted. When faced with evidence that contradicted their fundamental assumptions about me, they would question the evidence rather than examine their assumptions. I made it the same way I've been trying to help you make money for years, I said. Cryptocurrency trading, real estate investments, tech startups, all the things you called fantasy money and computer games. Oh, I pulled up my trading history, showing the progression from that first $500 investment to the current portfolio. It started with this, I said, and pulled the old Dell laptop from my bag. The sight of it made my father step backward, like I'd shown him a weapon. This is the laptop you threw across the room 5 years ago. The useless machine that wouldn't feed me. Every dollar in those accounts was earned on this computer, using the skills you said were worthless. My mother was crying now, though I couldn't tell if it was from shame, confusion, or something else. Madison, honey, why didn't you tell us? Tell you what, Mom? That I was successful? I tried. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time you complained about money, I offered advice, I suggested investments, I tried to help. And every single time I was shut down, dismissed, told I didn't know what I was talking about. I pulled out my phone again and played the recording of our last family dinner, my father's voice echoing through the country club's dining room. You don't get to have opinions about money when you've never earned a real dollar in your life. The silence that followed was deafening. Other diners were staring now, but I didn't care. This conversation was 5 years overdue. Here's what really happened, I continued. While you were calling me a disappointment, I was quietly paying Uncle Mike's mortgage to keep him from losing his house. While you were saying I had no skills, I was sending money for Pearl's car repairs and letting Mom take credit for helping her. While you were ashamed to talk about me at work, I was building a $45 million empire. I looked directly at my father. I wasn't hiding my success to deceive you. I was hiding it to protect you from your own small-mindedness, because I knew that even if I had all the money in the world, it wouldn't be enough to earn your respect if I hadn't earned it the way you thought I should. Pearl found her voice first. Madison, I had no idea. The things we said were exactly what you thought, I finished. That's the problem. You never questioned your assumptions about me, never wondered if there might be more to the story. My father was still staring at the laptop, his face cycling through emotions I couldn't read. Finally, he spoke. If you had all this money, why did you let us worry about you? Why did you let us think you were struggling? Because every time I tried to help, every time I suggested you could invest better, or offered financial advice, I was told to stay in my lane. Because my success didn't count if it wasn't the kind of success you understood. I put the laptop away and looked around at my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, who had spent 3 weeks taking sides in a conflict they didn't understand. I came here to give you one chance, I said, to see if this family is capable of accepting that success comes in many forms, that intelligence can't be measured by degrees, and that your youngest daughter isn't the failure you've convinced yourselves she is. My mother stepped forward, her makeup streaked with tears. Madison, we made mistakes. We said terrible things, but we're family. Surely we can work through this. Can we? I asked. Because working through this means acknowledging that you systematically dismissed and emotionally abused me for years. It means recognizing that your love has been conditional on my conforming to your expectations. It means family therapy, real apologies, and fundamental changes in how you treat people whose lives don't look like what you think they should. I pulled out a business card and handed it to my mother. This is a family therapist in Columbus, someone who specializes in reconciliation after emotional trauma. If you want a relationship with me, that's where it starts. I looked at Pearl, who was still staring at me like she'd never seen me before. I'm not doing this for revenge, I said to all of them, I'm doing it because I love you enough to demand better. I love you enough to refuse to be your scapegoat anymore. And I love myself enough to stop shrinking to fit your limited vision of who I should be. I pulled out my keys. The Tesla remote made its distinctive chirp and started walking toward the door. Madison, wait, my father called. I turned back. What happens now? I looked at this man who had screamed at me to get out of his house, who had called me trash, who had spent 5 years undermining my confidence while I secretly paid his bills. Now you decide what kind of people you want to be, I said. You can dismiss this as showing off. You can find new reasons to minimize what I've accomplished. You can convince yourselves that I'm still somehow in the wrong. Or you can do the hard work of examining how your need to feel superior cost you a relationship with your daughter. I paused at the door and looked back at Pearl, radiant in her graduation photos, surrounded by family pride she'd never had to fight for. Congratulations on your MBA, I said genuinely. You worked hard for it and you deserve to celebrate. Just remember, we both succeeded. We just took different paths to get there. As I walked through the parking lot, I could hear voices behind me. My family arguing, calling my name, probably debating whether what they'd just witnessed was real. But I didn't turn around. I had spent 5 years waiting for their approval, hiding my light to avoid making them uncomfortable, playing small to preserve relationships that were built on false foundations. I was done waiting. The drive back to Florida felt different than the drive up. I wasn't running away this time. I was choosing my direction. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts from family members, but I let them go to voicemail. Whatever happened next, it would happen on my terms. At a rest stop outside Jacksonville, I finally listened to the messages. Some were angry, some confused, some apologetic. But the one that mattered most was from Pearl. Madison, I've been sitting here thinking about the last 5 years, about all the times you tried to help and all the times we shut you down. I need you to know I'm proud of you. I'm proud of what you've built, and I'm ashamed of how we treated you. I don't know if we can fix this, but I want to try. I love you. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough to undo 5 years of systematic dismissal and emotional abuse. But it was a start. As I pulled into my driveway in Key Biscayne, watching the sun set over water that had become my sanctuary, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt free. The scared 19-year-old who had clutched the pieces of her broken laptop and refused to give up had finally been vindicated. Not because her family now knew about her success, but because she had stopped needing their validation to know her own worth. That night, I called Jake and told him everything. So, what's next? He asked. I looked out at my pool, my bay, my life that I'd built in secret and could now live in the open. Now I decide whether they're worth forgiving, I said, and whether I'm ready to let them be part of the life I've created. The answer wasn't obvious yet, but for the first time in 5 years, it was entirely up to me.